Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Celebration of the disappearance from this world of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada. So today we should speak about Bhaktisiddhanta. Every day we should speak only Bhaktisiddhanta or about Bhaktisiddhanta or about like all great personalities, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is very difficult to understand. Actually, anything about anything is difficult to understand. And if we realize this, then we can take shelter of Bhaktisiddhanta and be blessed with the ability to understand something about something. But especially great personalities are difficult to understand by us small personalities. As the saying goes, you can't accommodate an elephant on a plate. So the attempt to understand Bhaktisiddhanta is not possible for those of us with limited capacity. He spent all his life teaching Bhaktisiddhanta, although it's not possible to learn Bhaktisiddhanta. So that might seem like a paradox. Why dedicate your whole life to teaching something that cannot be learned? It cannot be learned because it is achintya, inconceivable. Inconceivable, not inconceivable in the sense of something illogical, like a square circle. But avang manasa gochara, beyond the jurisdiction of the mundane words, intelligence, etc. There are many reasons that may be so. One of them is because Bhakti is by its very nature paradoxical. You can say paradoxical in English and I'll explain a little bit what that means. Do you have the word in Tamil, dvidha? No, you don't have it. It's a similar word. Paradoxical means full of contradictions.
Paradoxical
or at least with one major contradiction. So this is one of the features of Bhagavan. Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, he's the smaller of the smallest, the greater of the great, the greatest of the great. And there are many apparent contradictions in him, which simultaneously exist in him or are intrinsic to his very being. Intrinsic means swarupgata in Sanskrit. It's not much help in Tamil. Swarupgata, you can learn that. Important word in philosophy in describing Bhagavan. So, and it's not that he has these mutually impossible characteristics. Or they're not possible to be present in one person, but they are always present in Bhagavan. It's not that he's smaller than the smallest sometimes and then sometimes bigger than the biggest. He's always smaller than the smallest and always bigger than the biggest and appears in medium-sized form also. So bhakti means the relationship between the insignificant jiva and the wholly significant Brahma, the supreme reality. How the insignificant jiva can be on an equal or greater footing than the supreme is a paradox. It is not possible to understand. It doesn't follow any logic or linear way of thinking. Therefore it is achintya, it is inconceivable. And therefore it cannot be learned. You can get your Bhakti Shastri degree, that's alright, but that doesn't mean that you're Bhaktisiddhanta Vit. It doesn't mean that you actually understand what it's all about. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur spent his whole life teaching this, which cannot be learned. It can be, in English there are different words, inculcated and imbibed. It's not exactly the same as taught and learned. Imparted, it means like given. But it's not like an object which you give, it's more like something heart to heart. On the whole, it's all rather mysterious. On the whole, it's rather mysterious. Krishna says in Bhagavad, Did you finish? Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam. He speaks of this as the king of knowledge and the most mysterious. You think, well, if it's knowledge, if it's the best knowledge, then after getting it, everything should be clear. But at the same time, it's the most mysterious. So that's paradoxical, that's contradictory, isn't it? So among the many apparent contradictions in the Supreme Person, there are many, many apparent contradictions, because everything is Him, and everything is within Him, everything is of Him, everything is produced of Him, everything is dependent on Him, if you can remember all those things. So there's nothing separate from Him, and therefore all states exist within Him all the time. Echaiva sattvika bhava. Yeah, all states of existence are produced of Him. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was a paradoxical figure. You can say mysterious, difficult to understand. Hare Krishna. Because he was preaching bhakti. And bhakti means that the heart should become very soft. But he appeared to be like a very hard person. Even his disciples were afraid of him. What to speak of others? And people couldn't understand how is he so hard. This is also stated about Lord Rama. Now, if we think of Lord Rama, we think of a very kind, sheltering figure, is it not? But to Ravana, Marichi, Kara, Dushana and other Rakshasas, they saw him differently. He appeared to be very harsh. Even to himself he was very harsh. He accepted so many difficulties when logically, you might say, it wasn't necessary. So this is described in the Uttarama Charit, quoted in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Uttar Rama Charit, in relation to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Vajradapi Kotorani, Mruduni Kusamadapi Loko Taranam Chaitangsi Konu Vigyatam Ishvaraha. That Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is also who is the Prema Pradaya, the giver of Krishna Prema Pradaya. He's also described here as hard as a thunderbolt and soft as a flower. Who can understand these great personalities, whose very being is above that of others? So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was very hard, because if we want to try to understand, we can say that he was preaching bhakti in this world. So everything in this world militates against bhakti, or it's opposite to bhakti. It goes against bhakti. So to teach Bhaktisiddhanta, it's not so much a matter of teaching facts and figures, information. It's not a matter of information. It's not even teaching some theorems or philosophical concepts, but it's a matter of a change of consciousness. In this material world, the consciousness is of the inhabitants is such that they are completely out of the realm of bhakti. They have no idea, they're just divorced, as if, alright, you can say. Pishachi paile jena motti channa hoy, maya grashta jiva hoy shei bhavudoy. Just like the jiva who's swallowed up by maya is like someone who's been haunted by a ghost. Just like someone who's haunted by a ghost, they'll attack their mother and father and try to kill them. Acting completely out of character, completely against their own self-interest. This is a term that Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur often used. Apaswartha parayana. In one term, it captures the tragic foolishness of every conditioned soul. That they're apaswartha parayana. They are, that they are wholly attached to that which is completely against their own true self-interest. So Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur was fighting in many arenas at once, or in many directions at once, with all kinds of false religionists and materialists and all kinds of different wrong ideas he was slashing. But he especially spoke against or fought with the adhokikta, the empiricism. Pratyakshavada. You could say pratyakshavada. But adhyakshikta, actually, it's little more precise. The idea that knowledge is to be gained through the senses. That everything can be we understand everything and work out everything ourselves. That we'll learn and we will understand and then we'll know everything. Just like the scientists, they're trying to find the one theory of everything, the one theory that will explain everything. And they keep on coming up with different theories about everything. And they make this theory and it looks wonderful and then everyone cheers and they all follow for some time. They think they've got it all worked out. And then someone points out, whoops, there's something wrong with that theory. And then they all deny it. But eventually they have to admit it. Then they all go back to their computers, I guess, nowadays and try to work it out. And someone comes up with another theory. And it gets shot down, but after a few theories, one hits, boom! This is it! We solved it! This is the history of science. They think they got it worked out, and then they find out, well, actually, it's not all worked out. And it goes on and on like this, and it will go on and on like this, because they'll never come to understand everything. This method of trying to understand is doomed from the very start. It is based on the supposition that everything can be understood in a linear way, in a systematic way, you could say. It presumes that, just like they say, well, all the universe should follow the laws there should be uniform laws of physics for the whole universe. They presume that the laws are uniform and they can find out what the laws are and then they'll understand everything that's going on. Now, one problem with this is the inherent limitations of human intelligence. Another is the presumption that any way we can perceive everything through our limited senses. And another is just the fact that they missed altogether, which by Bhaktisiddhanta we can understand, is that reality is not as we expect it should be. It is paradoxical. According to normal understanding, something which is very big cannot fit within something which is very small. But Krishna can, does, and is. So the fact is that everything cannot and never will be explainable by mathematical so-called laws. And that's true even in this world, what to speak of the spiritual transcendent world beyond. The ridiculous idea that feelings, emotions, ambitions, they can all be described by physical laws, mathematical laws. It's ridiculous. Bhakti, which is the ultimate feeling, desire, emotion, you're not going to be able to put that down on some mathematical law. But they try to explain this in absurd ways. Just like this Sigmund Freud, probably in India most people have never heard of him, but all the education is highly influenced by him. And he had a whole Pandora's box of absurd ideas. He had a whole treasure chest full of absurd ideas. Hey, why don't you take over? Someone give him a head massage, and then he can come back after 10 minutes. Give him a break. You want to go in? Okay, it's only trying. This is why you have to have a philosophical camp. I mean, you can't even translate it. We can talk about Bhaktisiddhanta and just tell some stories, the mango being stolen and this and that, which all demonstrates Bhaktisiddhanta, but we could go a little more also. So, one of the great ideas of Sigmund Freud, I have to say Sigmund Freud because there was on British TV, there used to be cooking, used to teach cooking, Clement Freud. One of his ideas was this brilliant idea that God is the idea of God comes because man used to wander in tribes, what are they called? Hunter-gatherer tribes, and one man was the strongest and he used to dominate the rest, and God is the psychological alter ego of the head of the tribe in the old days when we were uncivilized. And more recently, various people have come up with the idea that the belief in God is due to some gene left over in the DNA code that is not really necessary anymore, but somehow it's still there. And people who believe in God, it's just their, bad evolutionary luck. That's all. People are trying to make sense. They're trying to understand the world and make sense out of it. But it doesn't make any sense. This whole world is absurd. What is absurd about it? It's not the inequalities and the disturbances. These things in themselves are not the disturbance. In spiritual existence, there's also inequalities and all kinds of disturbances. But in the spiritual world, those disturbances, they give rise to rasa. Whereas in this material world, everything it simply gives rise to pain. So the empiric endeavor to bring everything under control, we can know everything, and in this way control the world, in the words of Stephen Hawking, and then we will know the mind of God, which means we'll also become on the same level with God. So the idea that everything should be reducible to some kind of knowledge that we can understand, this is actually impersonalism. It's dry. And the vice in spiritual existence is not that way. If you understand everything about Him, there's no more fun left. Just like one box full of treasure gets brought into Vrishabhanu Raja's house and is put in the room of Radharani. It's some treasure chest. So that is brought in very carefully. It can't be opened until she's in the room. Then they open it up and out jumps Krishna. Well, if you already knew that was going to be Krishna, then there wouldn't be any fun left, would there? So if you know everything, then there's no Leela, there's no Vilasa, there's no fun. So the idea we'll know everything, we'll control everything, we'll predict everything, it just makes life boring. Nirasa, no rasa. Boring. Rasahinam. So the mundane attempt to understand everything is an attempt to reduce, to take the sparkle out of everything, just to know it, as if to make everything a subject of our knowledge. It is a most unnatural approach. It's just to give some example, if a child, he starts measuring everything his father does, takes a record of how many times a day does he drink tea, how many times does he smoke a cigarette, and then makes a note of everything he says, and then tries to make a psychological analysis of it all. It's most unnatural for a child to deal with the father like that. And if he'd start to do that, the father would just crack him on the head and just say, look, just do what I say. So Krishna, through material nature, is cracking the jivas on the head and saying, listen, just do it. The mother is cracking and saying, hey, do what the father says. Do what Krishna says. No, I'm making my report. I have to get my Nobel Prize. So this is all absurd. There's all this science and study. It's all very dry. They all want to study everything. Some people understand it's absurd and they become distressed, or they become voidists. Think, well, this can't be real. Reality, there can't be anything real. If this is all we know that's real, then there can't be anything real. Or they become comedians, jokesters. They're just, just like they're making, they can't resolve, they can't understand all the paradoxes around them. Therefore they just make fun. The empiricists, they're trying to say, there's no paradox. Everything is very clear. Everything's okay. We've understood everything. Don't worry. And the jokesters, they're simply laughing that this is all nonsense. But they themselves don't know why it's nonsense. That's maybe why the humor of one culture is not understood in another culture. It's like the humor in Britain is not so well understood in America, and vice versa. And I think if you brought British comedians here, no one would understand what's funny at all. They'd probably think that that's what you're supposed to be doing. Isn't it a joke, how Indians are following the West? So, of course, in India they have a tradition of joking also. It's not that it's absent at all. Muttal, what is it?
It's not there at all.
Just like you have the jester who's with the king. That's there in the West and in India. He's relieving the king and everyone else from the paradox, actually. The king is he's actually just a human being like you and me in many ways, but he's taking such an exalted position. And then the jester just blows, one of these things in his face and mimics him and all this kind of thing. And everyone laughs, including himself. Otherwise you go crazy. So, Bhaktisiddhanta. What is Bhaktisiddhanta? Can we know all of it? Can we know everything about Bhagavan and about Bhakti? Bhakti means to recognize the paradox. Instead of trying to deny it, the materialists, they're trying to deny. We're trying to control the world. We got everything under control here, but they're just tiny little beings. We have such big desires and such little capacity to fulfill them. So they either try to deny the paradox, Or they recognize it, but they're just like that. They become a comedian or an existentialist or something like this. But bhakti means to live with the paradox. Now that's an English idiomatic saying, to live with something. It means to tolerate or to accept it. Just like you might say, well, my hand got chopped off in an accident, but I've learned to live with it. And living with it, I've accepted it. But bhakti means literally to live with the paradox. You live with Krishna. And that's all of what bhakti is about, from one perspective. And here we are, tiny and totally insignificant jiva. And here is Krishna, who's totally unlimited in all respects. And the jiva, by bhakti, can tie up Krishna. Or when Krishna's out, playing with his friends. No, I won't come back, I'm playing with my friends. Krishna's out playing with his friends and the servants are calling, come back, you have to come back for lunch. He says, no, if I go back, then my friends, they won't play with me tomorrow. So, he's the supreme, but he's afraid of what his friends will think of him. And even Rohini comes, and she calls him, and he says, and runs off. And she won't go with her. Then there's no other choice, Yashoda herself has to go. And then Krishna has to go back. Krishna's walking back like a good boy, looking at all the friends. When Krishna comes back in the evening from the pasturing grounds, all the demigods are waiting and offering prayers. And Krishna's friends, his cowherd boyfriends, think it's a great joke. They come in front of Krishna and imitate Brahma and Shiva and Indra offering prayers. So could someone just explain this, please? Give some psychological theory. It's not possible. It's paradoxical. And this is all the fun of bhakti. That's what makes bhakti. How the Supreme Lord, the greater than the greatest, he smashes, destroys Hiranyakashipu, the greatest personality in controlling the whole universe. And why does he do that? For the sake of a little boy. And Nrsimha, he won't become peaceful. Brahma is asking him, Lakshmi is asking him, he won't cool. When Prahlad says, could you just cool down a little bit now? Hiranyakashipu's dead now, you can cool down. He says, okay, alright. Then he agrees. So the materialists, they just totally, they want to understand reality without understanding this, which is really this is reality and everything else is of no importance besides this. But because they have taken a pact not to understand Krishna, therefore they, or to be separate from Krishna, therefore they are nashtadmano pabuddhyaha. They are lost to themselves and of very little intelligence. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he came to establish Bhaktisiddhanta. First of all, this whole approach of trying to understand by one's own endeavor, this must be stopped. Jnane prayasamudapasya namanta eva jivanti sanmukharitam bhavadi avartam sthane stita shutikatang tanuvang vanopi ye prayasho jita jitopya pitaistrilokyam. Yeah, the whole endeavor to understand by one's own faculties should be given up. And one should simply become humble. And one should live simply to hear Bhaktisiddhanta from the Bhaktisiddhantas. Instead of trying to change one's position from this position to that position and adjust everything in the material world, just relax, forget all that stuff. And just get absorbed in hearing about Krishna, being absorbed in Krishna. And by doing so, one can conquer the unconquerable. That's not possible. This is contradictory. You cannot conquer the unconquerable. What's the meaning of these words? Unconquerable means unconquerable. Okay, go back to the beginning of the verse. Jnane prayasamudapasya namanta eva. Give up the endeavor to understand all these things. And then you can come to the point of conquering the unconquerable. And every time you get to the end of the verse and then you say, whoop, that's not possible, you have to go back to the beginning. So much of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's endeavor was concerned with getting people to understand these words. Jnane prayasam udapasya. Give up this endeavor to understand by our own so-called own, with the very fact that we think it is our own is a disease in the first place. To give up this endeavor to understand by our own faculties. Then namanta eva, being humble. That's a really tough one. We have to work on it. It's not going to happen all at once. Therefore, tadvidhi pranipatena, come to Guru, one who knows, bow down. That's the beginning. At least if you can bow down, there's some hope. And then, having bowed down, not just as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say, this dandavat class. They just bow down, and okay, bowed down, did it. Okay, let's go off and do whatever else we're doing. Bow down, then sit down. Hear something. Boshechi shongera ashe. We didn't sing that yet. We come for association. That means hear. Namanta eva jivanti sanmukaritam bhavadiyavata. We should go on spending our whole life hearing from the devotees about Krishna. Then without making so many mundane endeavors, we should simply absorb ourselves in with all our faculties, instead of trying to understand this world, just hear and serve Krishna. And by doing so, we can conquer the unconquerable. It means we can conquer Krishna by love, by bhakti. And don't try to understand it. Your mother Yashoda, she's not thinking, how is it that Krishna is coming to me when after all he's the Param Brahma? She doesn't try to understand it. Even those who do understand it, like Devaki and Vasudeva, they don't spend much time trying to understand it all. There's no university in Dwarka where people can get their PhD on the psychology of controlling Krishna or any such thing. They just live it all the time. They live with the paradox. And they'll say openly among themselves, how fortunate are we? Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we're living with Him. He's our Father, our brother, or son, or husband, or whatever. Of course, Rupa Goswami has analyzed all this in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But it's not that we're trying to understand, apply any formula to this. The formula is to associate with the great devotees. That's all. And therefore the great devotees come to this world to exhibit, or to just by being here, then people fortunate, those who are fortunate, come to them. And the unfortunate try to analyze them. It's most ironic that personalities like Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who spoke against this whole analytic method, that the analysts, they try to analyze them. They try to say, well, you see, the social circumstances and the political circumstances and then his psychological makeup and all this garbage. They're trying to understand the acharyas through some kind of socio-cultural lens. There may be some socio-cultural lens because the acharyas act within the circumstance they appear to lift others up. But that does not define them. Those circumstances do not define them. So, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, this paradox about him, that he was preaching bhakti, but he appeared to be so hard. It doesn't seem to make sense, because bhakti is pure love, pure affection. But that his hardness is a symptom of his love. If you intensely love someone, you can't tolerate that others will insult him or denigrate him or act against him. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, seeing the whole world against the sense of surrender to Krishna, he was very strongly against that. Just like you say, if you're overseas and someone speaks against India, you may feel, It's very bad. Why are they speaking against my country? Or some foreigner speaks against the Prime Minister of India. Even you may not be that much inclined toward the Prime Minister, but you think, who are you to speak about our Prime Minister? I think in Tamil Nadu, not that many people have that much feeling for Manmohan Singh, or for anyone who from North India for that matter, or for outside Tamil Nadu for that matter. But because someone we feel close to, then we become disturbed if they become insulted. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's warlike attack on Mayavadis, bogus Vaishnavas, empiricists, and everyone else, that is the symptom of his love for Krishna. If someone is against Krishna, then if you love Krishna, then naturally you should become upset, is it not? But his upsetness, it wasn't like he was just trying to kill them all, but his compassion that he wanted to rectify all the people who are against Krishna consciousness. So many of the things he said were apparently paradoxical or contradictory. It appears so according to mundane vision. He was not what you might have expected him to be. You expect that a sadhu will be always very calm and polite, which is not that he was impolite, but he was very, very heavy. He was known as lion-like. You expect that a sadhu will live in very renounced. Well, actually, he was very renounced. Then he took sannyas, and then he lived in a palace and had all nice clothes. He was living like Gorky Shawdas Babaji. Then after he took sannyas, he accepted fine clothing, upholstered room, and so many things. Car to drive in. So all this is impossible to understand unless one understands or one can appreciate. When I say understand, again, it's not by analytical understanding. If one can appreciate his intense bhakti, his intense desire to serve and please Krishna. And the very fact is that Bhaktisiddhanta, it's a completely different perspective to that of this world. So if we think it will be something that I can understand according to my preconceptions, that in itself is a misconception. One has to be prepared to start off namanta eva. First of all, admit that you don't know anything. Not only that, but I am incapable of knowing anything. Tomara karuna sha, the mercy of the devotees is the only hope and possibility for us. So, as soon as we accept that we cannot understand him or Krishna, then we can begin to enter into bhakti. Understanding will be there, but in a completely different way to that which we understand at the present time. Bhakti is by its very nature unpredictable. Especially the Vraja Bhakti. You just don't know what's going to happen next, and that's all the fun. That makes Krishna so attractive. So to give the vision of Bhaktisiddhanta came to this world. And so many things he said which were they just turn upside down our whole way of thinking and understanding. For instance, he said that, about his being apparently harsh and hard, he said that in the present age, especially in the present age, the negative method will, actually I can read it out, I brought that here. The negative method is more efficacious than Then the positive method. Effective. It's a fancy way of saying effective. Means the same, more or less the same thing.
Negative method.
The negative method, well, I can read it out, but you won't be able to translate it anyway. I don't know, it's your language.
I just want to hear that one more time.
Okay, well, I'll read out what he said. The truth, Satya, is propagated in a twofold way. Viz, namely, positively, by the method of direct support. How would you say that in Hindi? Positive and negative?
Sakaratmak, nakaratmak.
Sakaratmak?
Nakaratmak.
Nakaratmak. It's not really the same, is it?
It's a literal thing, but...
means with form and without form. Akar? Is that based on sakar? Is based on akar? Or
it's not sakar, it's sakar.
Sakar. Sakar. Kara here means? Means action. Anyway, never mind. The truth cannot be, and negatively by the method of opposition. The truth cannot be made sufficiently known by the positive method alone. Propaganda by the method of opposition, more than the presentation of the positive aspect, brings about more brilliantly in this world the appearance and glorification of the truth. So he went on to say that actually Hiranyakashipu has better served the purpose of Godhead than has Prahlad. So we're going to say Hiranyakashipu ki jai. Well, he has a role in the wishes of the Lord also. He has shown that even if one fulfill all the desires that any jiva may have, even if you come to the level of Hiranyakashipu in fulfilling them, you remain miserable and you're destroyed by the Lord. So many amazing insights he gave. One of his disciples, Pranavananda, who later became Sri Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami, he said that I lived with him for 20 years and he would speak daily. He would generally not speak less than 2 hours at a time. He said, I never heard him say the same thing twice. He always gave I never heard him say the same thing twice. He always gave fresh angles all the time. There's constant flow of Bhaktisiddhanta within his transcendental mind. So we're very fortunate that Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada has presented us with the essence of all that, by which we can enter into that. He made it very easy for us. Otherwise, even to understand what he was saying was very difficult. Srila Prabhupada said, I used to listen to my Guru Maharaj. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I just used to sit and listen anyway. After his lectures, the devotees would gather around Sri Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, and then he'd explain to them Sridhar Maharaj would explain to all the devotees what Saswar Thakur had just said. Put it in more simple. But Srila Prabhupada absorbed it all, and he absorbed it and presented it. Just like last Sunday I said that if you ask anyone 2 days after a lecture, if you ask anyone what was said, then hardly anyone can remember more than 2%. So then why should we bother speaking at all? Those who can hear, they will understand. And gradually by transcendental psychological osmosis, everyone can understand. If they're just by being there. Ramanujacharya, he recommended, if you can't do anything else, just go and sit in the association of Vaishnavas. If you don't understand what they're saying, you have no idea how to serve them, just go and sit. Sit and keep quiet and just be there. So, any questions?
We reject Mayavad, saying that it doesn't make any sense. So, if the absolute truth is paradoxical.
Yeah, Mayavad doesn't make any sense, you're right. It's trying to make sense by denying Actually, the absolute truth doesn't make sense. That's a fact. It doesn't make sense according to what we think is sensible. So the Mayavadis try to deny the nature of the absolute truth as being as it is, but the real thing is for us to become sensible according to the standard of the absolute truth instead of according to our own foolish ideas of what sensible means. All right. So Mayavad doesn't make any sense. That's true. Well, you want to say something in favor of it?
I'm just trying to understand that if they may take misuse this, that absolute truth is paradoxical. So even if we say the statements,
oh, they do misuse it. Yeah, I mean they say that it's not possible to understand by words, and they say they do. Yeah. So, but certainly they misuse. It's not that we're going to stop speaking about Krishna because people will misuse that. To some extent, we have to see the audience also. We don't speak about Krishna stealing the gopis' clothes in the middle of non-devotees or less qualified devotees. But that doesn't mean that no one at any time should ever speak about that. It's not that we're going to pretend that this doesn't happen. We'll sanitize Krishna, civilize him. We'll sanitize Krishna. Who's the doctors here? What's the Tamil word for sanitize? Sudharam? Suharam. Or we'll civilize Krishna. The Mayavadis are very polite. Rascal politeness. They say that, well, this shows, this Vastra Haran Leela shows that, well, you have to be naked before God. That means you have to, what do they say? Something like you have to give up all pretensions before Him, or some, this is the way Mayavadis try to explain it. Krishna stole the gopis' clothes. They came before Him naked. Now we shouldn't speak about these things. These things should not be spoken about among materialistic people or Mayavadis. That just shows, the fact that they can't accept this Leela as it is just shows their consciousness is the same as the materialists. They're on the same level of consciousness. That they feel a need to explain it so in terms by which we can accept it. Just goes to show that their consciousness is materialistic. They're in the same paradigm as the materialists. They haven't understood the nature of the absolute. Both of them deny the absolute. Gross materialists deny that there is any spiritual dimension. And the Mayavadis, they give lip service to it while denying its everything that it is, that He is. So we can best serve Bhaktisiddhanta by following in the footsteps, Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhaktivedanta. We shouldn't think that this Mayavad is some outdated sectarian squabble. It's the disease in the heart of every conditioned soul, since time immemorial and forever into the future. Yeah, what was your question anyway?
Means if they argue like that, how to defend them if they say, anyway, absolute truth is illogical, paradoxical.
Yeah. Therefore we have to understand by Bhaktisiddhanta. If the Mayavadis say that the absolute is ultimately paradoxical, cannot be understood, yeah, and then we have to understand in the right way. Your way is the wrong way. By saying that you're equal to the Supreme in all respects, that is incorrect. See, paradoxical doesn't mean that it's without any form or purpose. That's what the Mayavadis want to say. There's no paradox in formlessness there's no nam, rup, gun, lila, then there's no paradox either. There's no rasa. That's what they say. It's just pure consciousness. Consciousness of what? Consciousness has to have some object. Vishayam. Object, he said. There must be some I guess that's subject. Yeah. It must be, in Vaishnava terminology, that would be ashray actually. Yeah, that would. Yeah. So, how are you going to speak with Mayavadis? It's not very fruitful to speak with them in a very logical way, because they're so illogical. Therefore, better to take the approach of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and just cut it with the sword. I mean, it wasn't his original idea. There are many Vaishnava acharyas who, you just have to cut it and fight it and show its absurdity. The fact is that the spiritual reality is paradoxical but not absurd. Whereas this material world, it is paradoxical and absurd. Reality is paradoxical. But this perverted reflection called the material world is absurd. And that is not absurd. That is the fact. To try to negate it because you can't understand it, or because you're inimical to it, then you just try to negate it all. That's another absurdity and impossibility. So we should perform the Pushpanjali, is it not? So let's do that. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.